this is the character we've been playing for the past couple days. And by past couple days, I mean 1 day. But we played it up until level 90, and I want to give some feedback on it before I swap over to something else. Because this build was part of a channel point redemption. So for like 250,000 channel points, someone can like ask me to play a build, or maybe plan a build with me, and then I play it to at least level 80 and just have some kind of feedback on like the playstyle or the build or my thoughts or some kind of feedback like that. So what we did here, the initial idea was to play Glacial Hammer, and what we ended up with was something that's very not Glacial Hammer. We started with the Glacial Hammer, but we decided that we don't have the threshold jewel for it because that's hard to get in SSF. So maybe some kind of like LE melee skill. We brainstormed those for a while. But one thing that we kept coming back to was, well, what if we had a build that used Petrified Blood along with Ichimonji in order to scale buff effect? So that was kind of the theme of the build that we got stuck with. And that's how we ended up playing a steel skill here. So we are playing Shattering Steel, Splitting Steel, one of those two things as a champion. We're a life-based build. We are using Petrified Blood. We'll go over this in a moment. But we are using Impale. We have Fortify all the time. And then we're using Adrenaline as well. So a couple interesting things about the build before we go like through each individual step. So the interesting parts of this build are because we're Petrified Blood, and we can buffer ourselves up above Lowlife, and then by using the skill, we'll go back below Lowlife. You'll see that pretty much all the time we can maintain the Adrenaline buff. So the Adrenaline buff from our Ascendancy is this here. It says 100% increased damage, 25 attack speed, cast speed, movement speed, and 10 additional physical damage reduction. So because we get to have Adrenaline, and it's a buff, we also get Fortify, which is a buff, and then we get Herald of Purity, which is a buff, because it gives you a buff when you turn it on. Precision also counts as a buff. Master of Metal counts as a buff. Onslaught, when we have that on kill, counts as a buff as well. There's a lot of things that count as a buff, and each one of those gets scaled by buff effect. So that's kind of the point of the build. We started out as a double Ichimonji build with 20% increased effective buffs. This is a buff. So that's like where the build came from, right? So we have permanent Adrenaline. The 6 length for our support gems is rather interesting as well. So we have our main skill here, either Splitting Steel or Shattering Steel. Vicious Proj, Brutality, and Impale should make a lot of sense in case you've ever played a build like this. And something that we were just talking about is that these kind of ranged projectile pseudo melee skills, you know, the kinds of things that all fall in the same domain as Spectral Throw, you don't have really good ways of scaling them unless you're using like LA damage. Because LA damage, you get to do this, but you also have like Wed or Lightning Penetration or added lightning damage support, like things like that, right? But for this, I think one of the really elegant things about this build is like the addition of Life Tap. So normally you'd have to use Maim, and Maim's like a 30% more damage multiplier. But this gives us 29% more damage, so it's like slightly less damage than Maim, and like Maim is already a gem that you're not so excited to use in your main links. But it also solves all of our mana issues. So we can just like fully reserve all of our mana as much as we want, and like we're gonna use our mana for like, you know, Enduring Cry on left click and maybe placing down a totem every once in a while. But that's about it, because our Leap Slam even has Life Tap on it as well. So I think Life Tap's a great inclusion here. And then we're also using Bloodthirst support. So Petrified Blood is something that we're gonna have to talk about a lot. But Petrified Blood, it cuts your life in half. It doesn't reserve your life. I'm gonna turn off all of my auras here so you can see exactly. So this is me with just Petrified Blood turned on right now. And I can flask up above 50% life. And like I do have regen in my build, but my regen and my leech and my life gain on hit, all of those non-flask recoveries can only get me to 50%. So even though like my blood rage is going right now, like I have enough regen, my regen caps me at 3,300 life. So the payoff for this, other than, yeah, I could technically like reserve this like you saw me doing before. I can reserve like Herald of Purity in there, for example. The payoff for this is using Bloodthirst support. So Bloodthirst support has a 19% more damage multiplier on it. So like by itself, like, yeah, it's got a bunch of flat damage. You can kind of think of it like added cold or added lightning, but it also has a 19% more damage multiplier on top of all of that. So what does this give me? It's about 2% of my maximum life as flat physical damage. And then let's see, 2%, let's see, 1% is 67. So 2% should be 134. It's 134 flat physical damage that I'm getting from Bloodthirst, which is about maybe twice as good or so as the flat damage that you get from chance to bleed. And then it's just like a more damage multiplier instead of a more bleeding damage multiplier, if you want to think about it like that. Flat damage, when you have a whole bunch of flat damage, that works well with attacking quickly. It works well with one-handed weapons that don't necessarily have much attack damage, but have a lot of attack speed and have a lot of crit on them. So that's one way of taking advantage of it. And the other way of taking advantage of it is things like Paradoxica that double your damage. You could even try to go a route like our backup build here, double damage against chilled enemies, and use this with like Glacial Hammer or any other skill that isn't Glacial Hammer, for example. In any case, Bloodthirst is an interesting source of like a bunch of flat physical damage with Paradoxica, with this, maybe with Void Forge is an option as well, maybe even Doomfletch's Prism. There's kind of some meme builds that we've been thinking about with Doomfletch's Prism as well, but that's the idea of what we've been doing here and why we are scaling damage in the way that we are. Going into this build, I thought that Petrified Blood was going to be a giant mess. I thought I was going to die all the time. I don't really believe in it. I don't think it's a great way of scaling damage. And here's my justification for it. In PoE, the limiting factor on builds, more often than not, is what can your defenses do, not how high can I get my damage. Damage is not the problem in PoE. There's a lot of ways to scale damage. There's kind of too many ways to scale damage. You know, like there's lots and lots of things to do. But the question is like, okay, how can I do all of that, but also have good defenses to back it up? So why are we choosing the avenue that gives us a penalty to our defenses to scale our damage? Why not just choose a different avenue to scale our damage that doesn't penalize us like this? So there are some cool upsides to Petrified Blood. I don't think it outweighs the downsides of it, but we can talk about it a little bit. Petrified Blood is a buff, which is why we have our double Ichimonji here, or we had before we started using one of these. So it says 40, 77, 40. So on Petrified Blood, we have 40, and then these two numbers here are written backwards. So as you scale up gem level, it goes up to 81. So 40, 81, 40. And then these two numbers are also backwards. As you put quality on them, it goes to -5. So 40, 81, minus 5. 40, 76, 40. So you're mitigating 40% of your damage by being a low life character, and then you take 76% of the damage. So I think the best way to think about Petrified Blood is to think about the extreme cases of it. If you had like a billion increased effect of auras, or sorry, not of auras. If you had a 1,000,000,000% increased effect of buffs on you, here's what would happen. When taking damage from hits, 100% of life loss is prevented. So you prevent all damage from hits. Then take 5,000% of life loss prevented this way over 4 seconds. So if you think about this in like the extreme scenarios, you can see what's going on with Petrified Blood, right? You are mitigating the chunky hits, and you're turning them into something that you need to leech through, or something that you need to like regenerate through, right? For me, because I have, let's say we have 2 Ichimonjis here. Can't quite show you this, but Ichimonji has 10% increased effect of buffs on you. So 10%, is 5% 10%? It's 10%. So it's 10% times 2 is 20% increased effect of buffs on you. So 20% increased effect of buffs would put this to 48% of life loss is prevented. So you're mitigating like immediately, just like 48% of damage, it's not there. And instead, you receive that 48% of damage as 81 minus 5, because you have quality on it, 76. And then 76 is scaled in a way that hurts us by our buff effect. So 76, 7%, about 15. So 76 plus 15, 76, 91% of the life loss prevented this way is lost over 4 seconds instead. So if we choose to use Ichimonji like we are right now, what's happening is this. We are mitigating additional damage, but we're also making ourselves more reliant on leech and regeneration in order to offset how much damage we're going to be taking over the next 4 seconds. And that's why we're investing in things like, let's take a look here. We have Gladiators Perseverance. This is increased maximum total recovery per second from leech. Down here, we have Hematophagy along with the 2 nodes on the side, which increased maximum total recovery. Remember, There's a lot that goes into leech, but the TLDR is if you want your leech to be stronger in instances like this, you need the word maximum. That's why on things like Vitality Void, the important part here is the maximum total recovery. So we have more extra investment into leech to make our leech stronger. We also have a little bit of life gain on hit from one of our rings here. We could spec over to Val Pact. Val Pact would give us a better regeneration, but in any instance where we're not leeching, we just lose all of our natural regen, and we also lose our Enduring Cry. So I think I'm not really into that. You could go for like heavy leech investment. It's like 4,000 or so. Use Val Pact to double that to 8,000, and that'd be like a really good layer of defense. But you're sacrificing, you know, a non-zero amount because you no longer have any regeneration. You no longer have Enduring Cry, stuff like that. For the rest of the build, what's going on here? I have an Enlightened 4. So we happen to have our Herald of Purity and our Precision on Blood Magic. Blood Magic got renamed to Arrogant Support. Then we have cast damage taken Steel Skin, because I don't want to lose my Endurance Charge once I have them. And the rest of this is just like Dread Banner, Pride, Enduring Cry, Second Wind, just like some pretty normal looking stuff rounding out the rest of the gear here. And then we have Ancestral Protector. Because we're a ranged skill, we don't benefit from the more melee damage from Val War Chief Totem. So we have to use Protector instead. If we have Protector up and our Frenzies from Blood Rage, and we have Onslaught because we killed recently, when we have those things up, if we also have Adrenaline, that's Adrenaline, Onslaught, Blood Rage, Frenzy Charges, and Ancestral Protector, we have a ton of attack speed, which actually makes this skill feel very, very good when we are doing ultimatums and whatnot. So that's kind of what the skill's doing. And then real quick, I want to show you a map. You know what? I just talked about this being a nice, comfy place to be. Let's go ahead and do it. So I actually think, I'm going to close this real quick. I actually think one of the biggest downsides of where I currently have this build is the use speed, because I have the wrong Lord of Steel unique jewel for Call of Steel. As we're doing this, I'm going to point out two things. First of all, the use speed when I use Call of Steel sucks. It's I wouldn't willingly do this again unless I had the correct Lord of Steel unique jewel. The second thing that I want you to watch as we're doing this this ultimatum in the background is watch my health and see what's going on with it. There's there might be a time every once in a while it happens where like my normal life, which is like this lower section down here, disappears, and it's only like this crimson life. So what that means is like I'm going to die in 4 seconds unless I can leech through, right? Like that's like taking out a loan from the bank that I can't currently repay because my job hasn't paid me yet. All right, so like it's too real. I don't want to make that joke. Let's go like this. And we tried out this skill. This is Splitting Steel. We tried out Shattering Steel as well, which almost feels like a melee skill because it has 0 range to it. And then we also tried out Lancing Steel. And like if I had a savior to go along with my Paradoxica, I think I'd be more willing to try out the Lancing Steel thing. But as it is, I wasn't really into it. Shattering Steel literally has twice the damage of Splitting Steel. And I used it up until like level 85 or so while I was leveling. You can see I kind of have to like run away every time that I click on my Call of Steel because my use speed on it is so slow, right? Not the best, but I'm working with it. So despite Shattering Steel having about twice the damage of my current skill, Splitting Steel feels magnificently better to clear with. And I've been saying today, there's kind of a comparison between like these steel skills and what I think about when I think about poison. Because poison skills for me, they all kind of have a similar flavor to them. It's like, well, whatever the poison skill is, like maybe you're playing like Poison Bladefall Blade Blast, it matters a lot for single target, because like that's where your damage is going to come from. But for AoE, you know, a significant portion of your AoE, and like your AoE playstyle even, comes from Plague Bearer. So like no matter what poison skill you play, you're kind of also playing a Plague Bearer's build, right? And like whatever you're doing beyond that, you know, is just like the thing that you're doing for single target. If you think about it, this is kind of the same Z feeling that comes from like an explodey chess piece. Rest in peace, Harvest. But yeah, like every skill kind of starts to feel the same because like you have an explodey chess piece and you just like scale the explosion, and then you're stuck with like, okay, well, what am I gonna do for single target, because that's the only thing that's left in the game. I'm gonna skip the boss here. The boss is fine, but I just want to keep chatting with you. Yeah, so I feel like Call of Steel is like my AoE skill. And I don't have much use speed on it, which is kind of why it feels bad. So, I said I was going to show you the jewel. Let's go ahead and hover over this. I've got the wrong one here. The correct 2 versions of this, with the 2 I don't have use speed. Mine's got like increased reflected damage and increased area of effect with Call of Steel. I think that about covers what we've done with this character here. What I plan to do with this character now, I want to take this character and spec out of my range stuff. So I'm going to take off Iron Grip. I'm going to take off Point Blank. And I'm going to probably pull the skill tree off the left side. So I'm going to need some extra dexterity. And maybe I'll spec into like Disemboweling as well, because I want to take this outline and use Bladestorm. I haven't played Bladestorm in a while, and I keep finding myself thinking like, if I could only just like make this into a melee character, I could avoid all the awkwardness of it. One last thought that I want to share with you is about Call of Steel itself. So both Shattering Steel and Splitting Steel have this issue. I don't know about Lancing Steel because I haven't read that gem because I don't like it. I don't want to play it. But we've been investigating these 2 skills. So Splitting Steel, if you don't have any steel charges, you deal 35% less damage. If you are using Shattering Steel, this guy up here, well, it says projectiles deal 100% more damage with hits and ailments per steel shard consumed. So it's 200% more damage with Shattering Steel if you have your things up. And like those numbers sound cool, and like the damage, the DPS numbers in POB look about fine. My current character that I'm looking at is maybe about 2.5 mil with Splitting Steel and about 5 mil if I use Shattering Steel instead. You know, standing on top of an enemy, taking advantage of like Point Blank and stuff. But the downside of these skills is if we ever don't have our steel shards up, we don't do anything. We're like not even half a build. And when we do have our steel shards up, our build feels pretty flippin' good. So what does this mean? It means you're playing a 2-button build. And it's not like clicking the second button amplifies your damage. It's not like here's the high point and now we're going to juice up our damage by clicking our big skill. It's like, well, we don't do anything unless we click the button. So like, is it really DPS or is it really DP5 and then hold on, let me recharge DP5 again? Because like DPS is like, well, okay, well, what if I get a 5-second window to attack? Well, I can only attack for 3 seconds and then I have to recharge and attack again. And like, heaven forbid that you forget to. Or like maybe you're leap slamming around, you like, you know, didn't get your right Call of Steel in. And all of a sudden you go in for your big DPS window against a Conqueror. And this is what you're doing. It's cool. Call of Steel is insanely strong for ultimatums. Not Shattering Steel. Shattering Steel is pretty cool. You know, Splitting Steel, this skill right here, this is pretty cool too. But Call of Steel is insane. The AoE damage and like hitting all those monsters in a small area around you is nuts. And it does so much damage and it hits everything. It's very, very good. I just don't like firing blanks, chat. I didn't talk enough about Petrified Blood. I feel like I've been talking about Petrified Blood for like a week now. But I think regarding this character and like my thoughts on it and what we're planning on doing with it in the future, that about covers it. So, yeah, sounds good.